one constant element for me when we deal with regional integration is the comparison between the potentially high leverage for development and high expectation from regional integration and the relatively generally slow implementation, slow progress in the field. Finally, I would mention the role of the private sector in regional integration. The dialogue with the private sector in many policy areas, and certainly when it comes to trade and regional integration, is conducted at a very different level, to put it mildly, in different contexts. And I think the role and potential of private sector also in respect of regional integration would deserve to be better developed.
So also on the linkages between the private sector African capacity and the dialogue with the regional economic communities or the regional integration organization, I don't think it's there very much. I mean, or at least will deserve to be improved.
The European Union has this kind of schizophrenia. It preaches the gospel of ownership, and that's great nomenclature. But at the same time, the subliminal message to all ACP regional integration, be like us. So there is no room for invention. And I would argue that that is one of the reasons why the more interesting streams of regional integration, which are emerging, and especially in Africa, are not supported frontally by the European Union.
Who are the future ACP countries when we think about Africa? If the regional dynamics are also wanting to include North Africa, should we pay attention to that and leave that option open? And then our key concern really was this question of regional bodies and their capacity. I believe it was already 20 years ago when we had first debate on this in the ministry, and we are really looking for evaluation of what kinds of improvement we have really achieved with the increased also development financing to these bodies.
If we were starting with a blank sheet of paper, we wouldn't create the ACP today. I think that's the fundamental conclusion that myself and colleagues thinking about this have reached. And if we look at the ACP, I mean, there are a number of disparate groups within it. You know, the three main regions are different enough as they are, and even within Africa, the sub-regions within Africa appear to be behaving and operating differently with different objectives. So I guess the fundamental question that we have to ask ourselves is the Cotonou Agreement, is it contributing to these problems, or is it helping to address them?
There are at least 13 member states in the EU that joined 2004 later that feel very little ownership related to ACP. We hardly know anything about this region. This is, from our point of view, Southern Hemisphere, apart from perhaps Southeastern Asia and Australia. This is, we can't name the countries. We have hardly been there. So that's about ownership from the EU point of view.
We are talking about the process, whether we need to have an ACP, EU, something, regional integration within post-Cotonou, or we're looking at the support for regional integration. I have a bit of a difficulty to see when we take the helicopter view of whether that really fits within an ACP EU framework, or everything we've been saying here could fit within a joint EU-Africa partnership, or whatever partnership you have with Pacific or Caribbean. I think to me it's very important that at some point in time we, to me you were talking about we're tailors, but we need those clothes at the end of the day.
I want to insist on two things about regional integration. One is mobility and the other one connectivity. I mean, that's the same, be it for Africa or Europe. If you want a regional integration, you have to have mobility and you have to be connected to your neighboring countries.
High expectations, but slow implementation. Why is there this slow implementation? And in the literature, there are economic reasons, specific to South-South communities. There are political economy reasons and there are political reasons. And if I may single out one of this setup, it is also the specific role of regional hegemony.
Export trade within regional integration schemes in Africa within the last decade grew by 10%. But exports within Sub-Saharan Africa, within Africa beyond integration schemes, grew by 25%. So we see that there is really the potential. There is a big potential, but it's not necessarily within the existing schemes, and some of the people have already touched upon that. So I think it's really a necessity in supporting regional integration to look beyond the schemes.
One debate is what should regional integration look like, and this is for those who decide for their own regions. And the other is how can we best support that. They are two linked but different debates.
Another thing which I would like to highlight as well is the problem of, we have been working recently on that, including with the colleagues from the FID and others, on the data and statistics problem. I mean, it's not new, but it's there, and I think in an area like trade, and intra-Africa trade in particular, it is very important. I mean, the informal trade and cross-border trade, I mean, informal, is sometimes 80% of the GDP in Benin and 20% in Nigeria. So there are some assumptions and policy decisions which are not necessarily based on a strong evidence base.
Our African friends have managed to defend now in the trade in goods agenda, and it is all in the EPA texts now, what they deemed important, and I do as well besides, if managed well, for a proactive structural policy in agriculture and industry in particular. Export duties, infant protection clauses, a relatively long exclusion list, and so on and so forth. All that is in there, and those who have been in the negotiations know that that has been a major bone of contention. I'm very much in favor of the use of these instruments, but if they are not well used, they are a danger, because they are an invitation to protectionist policies without anything developing behind these barriers.
If you want to have something that is 21st century, I agree that it has to be broader. Trade in goods, we know that today with the global trade and investment landscape that is changing, goods only, I mean, trade is more about intermediaries and rather than commodities. So to me, this is really an issue. But the problem is that, we're talking about how do you broaden that?
There is a fair amount of resistance from some of our partners that we are seeking to support for their own benefit as much as ours. There is widespread resistance in important quarters to what we are trying to achieve through the EPAs. And I think the key question is, why is that? The two key questions: why is that, and what can be done to assuage some of those doubts and overcome some of those concerns?
Unless we have that strategic thinking, all what we do is just maybe a reaction to a number of problems that we have faced ourselves in our work, daily work, but it's not embedded in a long-term strategy.
What should constitute a part of the post-Cotonou construct? What should be handled at ACP level? What should be handled at the national/regional level? The role of the non-execution clause in the CPA. Is there a role for the ACP EU to promote global development agenda? How much of TFA implementation can be done at regional and national level? And what is the added value of the ACP in this endeavor? Do the ACP EU have a common vision on economic growth and sustainable development? Do we know what works in the CPA and how can these be propagated? How do we ensure coherence at the international fora?